The equipment went underground and did not come back with nothing. That is the part they are not saying clearly enough. A research team on a cold volcanic mountain in eastern Turkey lowered scanning instruments deep into a boat-shaped ridge and pulled back data that nobody inside that project has been able to explain away. Not the geologists, not the soil scientists, not the radar engineers, and critically, not the skeptics who showed up specifically to end the conversation. They are all still at the mountain. They are not talking to journalists anymore. The footage from the deepest scans has not been released to the public. What has been released is enough to understand why. This is not a story about belief. This is a story about what happens when the data refuses to cooperate with the conclusion everyone agreed on before the instruments were ever turned on. Let us go back to how this started, because the beginning matters more than most people realize. For generations, the search for Noah's Ark was pointed at the wrong mountain. Expeditions kept returning to Mount Ararat, the great volcanic peak straddling the Turkish-Armenian border, with their crampons and their cameras and their absolute certainty that if the Ark existed, it was up there somewhere under the ice. They came back with frostbite and nothing else. The mountain swallowed careers and reputations and gave back nothing of value. The reason is simple: they were looking in the wrong place. Approximately 18 miles south of Mount Ararat sits a smaller, harder mountain called Tenderek. The ground there is volcanic and fractured. The wind is relentless. The villages scattered through the valley beneath it are among the oldest continuously inhabited settlements on the planet. And the people who live in those villages, generation after generation, have always pointed at a specific shape on the slope above them and used the same word for it. They call it the ship. Not because anyone told them to, not because of a book or a scholar or a documentary, because from the valley floor, when the light falls across it at the right angle, that is what it looks like: a hull, a vessel, something placed rather than grown. In 1951, a Turkish military captain named İlhan Durupınar was flying a NATO reconnaissance mission when the outline appeared beneath his aircraft during aerial photography. He captured it. Those photographs moved through military and analytical circles and started a question nobody could close. The formation in those images was long, narrow, tapered at both ends, and symmetrical in a way that geological accidents rarely manage. When researchers ran the measurements, the formation came in at approximately 515 feet in length. Genesis instructs Noah to construct the ark at 300 cubits. Using the upper range of accepted ancient cubit measurements, that converts to exactly 515 feet. The researchers who first ran that comparison reportedly went quiet for a long time before anyone said a word out loud. The Turkish government sent a formal team in 1960. They returned with readings they could not fully interpret and filed a report that spent the next several decades in a cabinet doing nothing. The mountain kept its silence, and then modern equipment arrived, and the silence became something else entirely. Ground-penetrating radar does not guess. It does not interpret legends or take sides in theological arguments. It sends signals into the earth and reads what comes back, the shape of what is buried, the density, the internal layering. When researchers from the Noah's Ark Scans project, working in collaboration with Turkish university teams, including Agri Ibrahim Tekin University, brought this equipment to the Durupınar Formation and ran their first scans, the data returned almost immediately, and it did not look like geology, it looked like architecture. The scans showed long parallel lines running the full length of the formation. Right angles appeared in the data, and right angles are exactly what natural processes almost never produce without assistance. What appeared to be horizontal structures, stacked one on top of another. Vertical divisions separating interior space into distinct enclosed sections. The researchers kept using one specific word in their documentation to describe what they were seeing beneath the surface. That word was compartments. Pause on that for a moment. Genesis does not describe Noah's Ark as one open chamber. The text is specific. 3 decks, described as lower, middle, and upper. Rooms throughout, not a cargo hold. Rooms. The scans coming out of that ridge were matching that description with a precision that no one on the team had prepared for. Several members had come specifically to disprove it. That was the working assumption before the instruments went on. They expected to find a basalt formation shaped by lava flow and erosion, something that would produce a tidy geological explanation and let everyone go home. What they found instead was 3 layered structures divided into internal sections, buried inside a mountain in the precise region the ancient account identifies, at the precise dimensions the ancient text specifies. And that was before the soil chemistry came back. When soil scientists on the team pulled samples from inside the formation and compared them side by side with samples taken from the slopes immediately surrounding it, the results were not what the same mountain logic predicted. 2 patches of dirt on the same volcanic slope should produce nearly identical chemistry. That is how mountain soil works. The dirt inside the Durupınar Formation was not the same dirt, not even close. Organic carbon levels inside the formation boundary were significantly elevated above what the surrounding terrain could account for. The soil scientist on the team, William Crabtree, stated it plainly. Organic matter inside the formation ran at double the concentration found in the surrounding soil. Potassium levels were 38% higher inside the boundary. The pH difference between inside and outside was 8 times what you would expect from the same geological deposit. Crabtree, who has spent his career reading soil chemistry, explained the significance in terms that leave little interpretive room. When wood rots over a very long period, it releases specific chemical signatures into the surrounding earth. It raises organic content. It changes potassium levels. It shifts pH. If a massive wooden structure decomposed slowly in place over thousands of years inside a mudflow, those are precisely the readings you would expect to find. And those are precisely the readings the team found, inside the boundary, nowhere else on that slope. The independent researcher Andrew Jones, who has been leading the ground-penetrating radar work at the site, put the significance of this bluntly. The differences between the inside and outside samples are, in his words, statistically staggering. He described them as perhaps the most compelling evidence for a man-made origin of the formation that the project has yet produced. When a soil scientist and a radar researcher are using words like staggering and compelling in the same breath, and neither of them is affiliated with a religious institution, the data deserves serious attention. But the radar did not stop at detecting compartments and layering. The most recent scans have found something that changes the nature of this investigation entirely. Deep inside the formation, the instruments have detected what appear to be tunnels, not small fissures or gas pockets, structured corridors. Jones announced that the new research has identified tunnels approximately 4 meters below the surface and roughly 2 meters in height, running down the center of the formation and along the inner edge of the hole shape. He also detected what appears to be a central passageway approximately 13 meters in length, cutting directly through the middle of the site. Let that land. A 13-meter corridor running through the interior of a 157-meter vessel-shaped formation buried in a mountain in eastern Turkey, sitting at a depth of 4 meters with walls tall enough to walk through. The geometry of that passage is not consistent with a volcanic rock pocket. It is not consistent with erosion damage or gas cavities. It is consistent with deliberate internal construction. The team brought in electrical resistivity tomography alongside the ground-penetrating radar, layering scan technologies to produce a more complete subsurface picture. Both sets of data pointed at the same internal features. The redundancy is important. When two different geophysical methods, operating on different physical principles, return the same picture of what is beneath the surface, the probability of coincidence drops considerably. The core drilling program now underway is perhaps the most significant step the investigation has taken. For the first time, researchers are recovering continuous, undisturbed stratigraphic cores from beneath the surface of the formation, going down between 75 and 100 meters in selected locations. These cores bring back actual material from depth, not just signals bouncing off buried surfaces, but physical samples of whatever is down there. The 1988 attempted drill in 4 locations failed. This program is using dry sonic core drilling, a method that extracts material without water or chemicals, preserving the integrity of whatever comes up. The results of that drilling have not been fully released. What the team has said publicly is measured and specific. The readings are unusual. The site warrants further investigation. Those are the exact words. Every single additional word has been chosen with extreme precision, and the precision itself is telling. Now consider the stones in the valley below, because they are part of this, and they have no alternative explanation that survives contact with their actual physical characteristics. A few miles from the formation, outside a village called Kazan, there are standing stones carved from basalt. Each one stands roughly the height of a 2-story building. Each one weighs multiple tons. Each one has a large hole drilled near its top. Not a small ornamental aperture, but an opening substantial enough to pass heavy rope through. They are arranged in a line that points directly back toward the formation on the slope above. The local name for these stones, passed down through generations with no academic intervention, is anchor stones. The valley tradition says they were dragged behind the ark during the flood to keep the vessel stable against the surge of water. Several carry crosses carved into their faces that date to the early Christian period. The stones themselves are considerably older. Nobody knows who quarried them. Nobody knows how they were moved to this location. No credible alternative explanation for why these specific objects with these specific holes are arranged in this specific valley pointing at a boat-shaped ridge has ever been formally offered. The anchor stone argument is simple. Objects that size with holes that large in that configuration exist for one reason. They are anchors, and they are pointing at something. Now step back from the site itself and consider the broader context, because the Drupal formation does not exist in isolation. The flood narrative is not the exclusive property of any single religious tradition. It is everywhere in the ancient record, and the breadth of that distribution is one of the most intellectually serious arguments for an actual historical event behind the stories. Close to 200 separate cultures, spread across every inhabited continent, carry a version of the same memory. A catastrophic flood, a righteous survivor warned in advance, a vessel built for survival, animals preserved, a world rebuilt from almost nothing afterward. The Babylonians pressed the account into clay tablets thousands of years before the current form of Genesis existed. Their version describes a man named Utnapishtim who constructed an enormous boat and wrote out a divinely sent catastrophe. The structural details match the Genesis account in ways that are difficult to attribute to coincidence or cross-cultural borrowing. The British Museum holds a tablet describing a circular ark built to precise engineering specifications. Researchers who built a replica to those specifications found that it floated. The ancient world was not only telling stories, it was preserving construction knowledge. The Hindu tradition records Manu being warned by a divine fish to build a vessel for the coming flood. The Greeks had Deucalion, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Hawaiians, Aboriginal cultures across Australia, and indigenous nations across the Pacific Northwest all carry this memory in their oldest oral traditions. The vessel changes shape across tellings, the names of the survivors shift, the geography adapts to local understanding. But the core of the account holds across every version without exception. The world drowned. A remnant survived. The vessel came to rest on high ground when the water finally withdrew. You can dismiss one culture's flood story as mythology. You can dismiss two as coincidence. At 200 separate independent cultures with no documented contact between them, separated by oceans and centuries, the word coincidence stops functioning as an explanation. Something happened. The record is too consistent, too widely distributed, and too specific in its details to have been independently invented by unconnected peoples across the entire surface of the planet. Which brings us back to the ridge in eastern Turkey, and what the instruments have found beneath it, and what the researchers who have looked at those findings are choosing not to say in public. There is a gap between the public statements coming out of this investigation and what the researchers are saying in private, and that gap has been noticed by journalists who have spent time in the region. The official communications are surgical, carefully structured, every word selected with awareness of what the alternative words would trigger. No member of the official team has used the phrase Noah's Ark in any press release, any conference presentation, or any peer-reviewed submission. Not once. And yet, the data they are producing is mapping 3 internal decks with enclosed compartments, a central corridor tall enough to stand in, soil chemistry consistent with the decomposition of a massive wooden structure, and dimensions matching a 300-cubit vessel to the outer range of the accepted measurement standard. The silence is not accidental. Institutional silence of this specific quality, this carefully maintained, this consistent across multiple researchers who were previously speaking freely to media, does not happen because of bureaucratic delay or funding disputes. It happens when people inside the project have understood something about what they are looking at and have decided that the implications of saying it directly are not something they are ready to manage. The geologist who spent 2 decades in this field leaning his forehead toward a monitor screen. The researcher who came specifically to debunk the site and instead said the words undeniably constructed and then stopped giving interviews. The original team members whose names were quietly removed from project documentation after they left without explanation. The petrified material samples now sitting in a locked cabinet that a laboratory technician called a colleague to discuss in distress and then stopped returning calls. What the camera found in the deepest bore sites has not been shown to the public. The structural features continue beyond where the scans predicted they would terminate. The compartments do not end where the initial models suggested. Each new feed from each new drill site shows the interior space extending further inward and downward than the previous scan suggested it would. Whatever is inside that formation is larger than the surface evidence indicated. The team has not reached the end of it. The next phase of the investigation is already being planned and executed. The dry sonic core drilling program will bring up direct physical material from beneath the surface for the first time. Carbon dating of those interior samples will either close this question with finality or open it in a way that cannot be walked back. Larger bore openings are being prepared. Higher resolution imaging capable of resolving finer surface detail at greater depth is being positioned. Direct surface sampling of the interior walls for laboratory analysis is the step that everyone connected to this project understands is the one that changes everything. Whether the political situation in the region and the institutional pressures surrounding this investigation allow that final step to happen openly and with results that are shared fully with the public is the question that nobody connected to the project will answer directly. The Turkish government, which controls access permits, has been aware of this site officially since 1960 and has designated it a national protected area. Any excavation or drilling requires governmental approval and academic oversight from partnering Turkish universities. The politics of what a confirmed finding would mean are not small, they are enormous, and enormous implications have a way of slowing down the steps that would confirm them. Here is what the data has already established. The formation is real. The 515-foot length is real. The match to 300 cubits is real, and it sits at the precise upper boundary of the accepted measurement range. The ground-penetrating radar is producing internal geometry that standard volcanic geology has no convincing mechanism to generate. The soil chemistry fits the decomposition profile of a massive organic structure in ways that are specific, replicable, and inconsistent with the surrounding terrain. The anchor stones in the valley below have no credible alternative explanation that accounts simultaneously for their size, their rope holes, their arrangement, and their alignment toward the ridge above. The tunnels and corridors now mapped inside the formation are real structures sitting at real depths with dimensions consistent with deliberate construction. And the people in the villages below the mountain have called it the ship for longer than any of the modern investigators have been alive. The researchers who went to this mountain expecting to disprove a biblical account came back unable to give interviews about what they found in any normal professional register. That is the most important data point of all. Not the radar readings, not the soil analysis, not the corridor dimensions. The silence of specific human beings who went to a mountain with professional frameworks for dismissing what they were about to find and came back from it without the language to explain what the instruments showed them. Whatever is inside that ridge has been in the dark for a very long time. Thousands of years by the most conservative reading of the ancient accounts. Longer by others. It waited while empires rose and collapsed on the ground around it. It waited while wars were fought on the slopes beneath it. It waited while the people in the valley pointed at the slope and said, "Ship," and were dismissed by everyone who had never stood in that valley and seen it from the ground. And now there are instruments inside it, and the people reading those instruments have gone quiet. Think carefully about what that silence actually means. Not the institutional silence. Institutions go quiet for ordinary reasons all the time. Think about the personal silence, the individual researchers, the specific human beings who came to this mountain to end a conversation and instead became unable to continue a different one. The structure keeps going. The compartments do not terminate where logic says they should. The data keeps returning features that no one has a clean geological explanation for, and the core drilling is bringing material up from depth for the first time. What that material contains, what it dates to, what it confirms or eliminates, that is the answer the whole investigation has been building towards since 1951, when a military pilot looked down from a NATO aircraft and asked a question that 75 years of serious research has not yet been able to close. The story is not finished. The cameras are still running. The instruments are still reading. And whatever has been waiting inside that mountain is still there, indifferent to the silence it has produced in everyone who has looked at it directly.